There is a moment looking into a mirror that most of us have experienced at least once. You stare long enough, or at the wrong angle, or in the wrong light, and something shifts. The face looking back at you becomes strange, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. It lasts a second, maybe two, and then it passes, and you go back to brushing your teeth or fixing your hair, and you don't think about it again. Medieval people thought about it constantly. The fear of mirrors in the medieval world was not superstition in the dismissive sense that we usually mean when we use that word. It was not ignorance. It was a coherent, internally consistent response to a set of theological, philosophical, and physical beliefs about what mirrors were, what they did, and what looking into one might cost you. To understand why a medieval person feared mirrors, you have to understand what a mirror actually was in that world, not what we know it to be now. A piece of glass coated with silver nitrate, a simple optical tool that reflects light according to laws that physics has mapped with precision. But what it appeared to be then, and what the available frameworks for understanding it suggested about its nature. Medieval mirrors were not glass in the modern sense for most of the period. The silvered glass mirror, as we know it, flat, clear, consistent, was not produced in any quality until the Venetian glassmakers of Murano developed the technique in the 16th century. Before that, mirrors were made from polished metal. Bronze, brass, silver, sometimes iron. They were round, they were small, and they were expensive. A good metal mirror was a luxury object, owned by the wealthy, often elaborately decorated on its reverse side with carved scenes or symbolic imagery. The image they produced was dim, distorted, and warm in colour, the amber and bronze tones of polished metal rather than the cool clarity of modern glass. You did not see yourself clearly in a medieval mirror. You saw yourself darkly. The biblical phrase from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, "Now we see through a glass darkly," was understood by medieval readers in relation to actual mirrors, which is exactly what they saw through, darkly. This dimness was not merely a technical limitation. It was theologically significant. The unclear image in the mirror was understood as an analogy for the unclear understanding available to mortal humans. We cannot see truth directly. We cannot see God directly. We see only reflections, dim and imperfect, of a reality that exceeds our capacity to perceive. The mirror was a philosophical object as well as a practical one, and its imperfection was part of its meaning. But the meaning of mirrors in the medieval world was far stranger and far darker than mere philosophical metaphor. The first and deepest fear was this: the reflection was not simply an image. It was, in some sense, a presence. This is not as primitive an idea as it sounds, and it did not originate in medieval Europe. The ancient world, Greek, Roman, Egyptian, across cultures, had understood the reflection in water or polished metal as something more than mere optics. The story of Narcissus, who fell in love with his reflection in a pool and wasted away gazing at it, encodes a genuine ancient anxiety about the power of the reflected image to capture something of the person reflected. The soul, in many ancient traditions, was understood to have a visible form, the shadow, the reflection, that could be separated from the body, and that was therefore vulnerable. Medieval Christianity inherited and transformed this anxiety. The theological tradition that the medieval church transmitted was complex on the question of the soul's visibility, but the popular understanding, the understanding that shaped ordinary people's relationship to mirrors, retained something of the ancient fear. The reflection might be the soul, or it might be a window through which something outside could see in. Or it might be a space in which something other than you had taken up residence, wearing your face. The last of these possibilities was the most frightening and the most theologically elaborated. Medieval demonology, the extensive, serious, scholarly tradition of thinking about demons and their operations in the world, gave mirrors a specific role in the devil's arsenal. Demons in this tradition could not create. They could only imitate, distort, and corrupt. And the mirror, which produced a reversed, imperfect imitation of reality, was understood as a natural instrument of demonic deception. The reflection that looked back at you from a polished surface was not you. It was reversed. Left became right, right became left. It moved when you moved, but it was not under your control in the way your body was. It could not be touched. It disappeared when the mirror was covered or turned away. These properties, which we understand as simple optics, suggested to medieval observers something uncanny, an entity that mimicked you without being you, that lived in a space adjacent to the real world, but not quite within it. Demonic imitation was a serious theological concern in the medieval period. The devil was understood to be an imitator, a mocker of divine creation, a producer of false versions of real things. The demonic mirror image, wearing your face, operating in the reversed world behind the glass, was a powerful and coherent expression of this theology. When a medieval person looked in a mirror, they were aware, in the background of their experience, that what looked back might not be entirely innocent. This connects to a broader medieval anxiety about doubles and imitation that runs through the literature and folklore of the period. The doppelganger, the double, the figure that looks exactly like you but is not you, is a medieval concept before it becomes a modern horror trope. The encounter with one's double was considered a death omen in Germanic folklore, a widespread belief that persisted in various forms through the early modern period and into the 19th century. The Romantic era's fascination with the doppelganger, in the stories of E.T.A. Hoffmann in Poe's William Wilson, in Dostoevsky's The Double, draws on a medieval tradition that the mirror helped to sustain. The mirror was also feared for what it could be made to do. Magic, which in the medieval understanding was not a metaphor, but a description of real operations performed by real practitioners using real supernatural forces, frequently involved mirrors or mirror-like surfaces. Catoptromancy, the practice of divination using mirrors, was known throughout the medieval period and was consistently condemned by the Church as a form of demonic consultation. The logic of mirror magic was not arbitrary. If the mirror showed a reversed, otherworldly image of the present, it might, under the right conditions, show images of other times and other places. If demons lived in or operated through mirrors, those demons might be compelled to reveal hidden knowledge, the whereabouts of stolen goods, the identity of a future spouse, the outcome of a battle. The mirror was a communications device in the medieval magical framework between the human world and the demonic one. The practitioners who claimed to perform this kind of magic were almost universally condemned by church authorities. But the condemnation tells us that the practice existed, and the existence of the practice tells us how seriously medieval people took the mirror's connection to the supernatural. You do not condemn things that nobody believes in. The repeated church prohibitions against mirror divination are evidence that it was happening, that people believed it worked, and that the belief was widespread enough to require official response. The fear of mirrors also had a specifically feminine dimension in medieval culture, and this dimension is worth examining carefully because it reveals something important about how the medieval world understood vanity, female beauty, and spiritual danger. The mirror in medieval art and literature is frequently a symbol of vanity in its most dangerous form, the form that leads the soul toward hell. Frau Welt, the figure of Lady World in German medieval allegory, is sometimes depicted holding a mirror. The mirror she holds reflects what she shows to the world: beauty, attraction, the pleasures of earthly life, while her back, which she does not show, is rotting, consumed by worms, the reality of what worldly pleasure leads to. The beauty in the mirror is a deception. The mirror is the instrument of that deception. The connection between women, mirrors, and dangerous vanity is pervasive in medieval culture and requires some disentangling. It was not simply misogyny, though it contained misogyny. It was a coherent, if unfair, application of a theological principle. The excessive love of physical beauty, including one's own, was a form of idolatry, the worship of the created rather than the creator. And because women were more thoroughly defined by their physical appearance than men in medieval culture, because female beauty was a social, economic, and theological category in a way that male beauty was not, the mirror was more specifically dangerous for women. The woman who spent time at her mirror was not merely being vain in the modern, trivial sense of the word. She was, in the medieval theological framework, actively engaged with something spiritually dangerous, a tool of demonic deception that reflected an image calculated to produce pride, that pride being the first and greatest of the 7 deadly sins. She was loving her own image. She was being deceived by a reversed, demonic imitation of herself. She was, at the extreme end of the moral argument, consorting with the forces that lived behind the glass. This sounds excessive, and it is excessive, and it was excessive to many medieval people as well. The tradition of critique of mirror-related anxiety is as old as the anxiety itself. But it was real, it was widespread, and it shaped the material culture of mirrors in ways that are still visible in surviving objects. Medieval mirrors were often made with covers, small hinged or sliding panels that could close over the reflective surface when the mirror was not in use. These covers served practical purposes, protecting the polished metal from scratching and tarnishing, but they also served the purpose of closing off the mirror's gaze when it was not needed. A covered mirror was a blind mirror. Whatever lived in or operated through the mirror was shut away. The practice of covering mirrors during periods of particular spiritual danger, during serious illness, after a death in the household, survives into the modern period in various cultural traditions, including the Jewish practice of covering mirrors during the Shiva, the mourning period following a death. The reasoning given varies. Some say it is to prevent vanity at a time of grief. Some say it is to prevent the spirit of the dead from being trapped in the mirror. Some say it is to prevent the mourners from seeing their own grief-stricken faces. All of these explanations carry traces of the deeper medieval anxiety. The mirror is not a neutral object, and at moments of spiritual vulnerability, it requires management. The story of the mirror's role in the death of the soul was elaborated in one of the most famous of all medieval theological warnings, the tale of Narcissus, retold and reinterpreted through a Christian lens. Ovid's original story was read in medieval Christian tradition as an allegory of the soul's self-destruction through self-love. Narcissus does not simply die gazing at his reflection. He fails to recognize that the reflection is not real. He mistakes an image for a being. He loves a deception. The medieval reader understood this as the danger that every mirror posed, the possibility of mistaking the image for reality, of loving the reflection rather than what the reflection was supposed to lead you toward. Because that is the theological complexity at the heart of medieval mirror anxiety. The mirror was dangerous not only because of what it might contain, but because of what it might distract you from. The mirror showed you yourself. And the self, in medieval theology, was not the ultimate object of contemplation. God was. The self was important, made in God's image, the vessel of the soul. But dwelling on the self, returning repeatedly to the mirror to gaze at your own face, was understood as a turning away from the divine toward the merely human. The mirror competed with prayer. It competed with contemplation. It turned the eyes inward and downward when they should be turned outward and upward. The alternative to the mirror, in much medieval devotional writing, was the window. Not a literal window, but the contemplative practice of looking outward, at creation, at the works of God in the natural world, at the community of believers, at the face of the divine as reflected in scripture and sacrament. The window showed you God's world. The choice between them was understood as a choice between pride and humility, between self-love and divine love, between the path to damnation and the path to salvation. This is a surprisingly subtle philosophical position, and it is worth sitting with it for a moment without immediately dismissing it. The question of what it means to dwell too long on one's own image, to be captured by one's own reflection, is not one that our own culture has resolved. The mirror has been replaced by the camera and the screen, and the ancient anxiety about Narcissus has found new forms that would be entirely recognizable to a medieval theologian, however alien the technology would be to them. We photograph ourselves constantly. We curate our own images for public presentation in ways that have no historical precedent. We return to those images, adjust them, compare them, measure ourselves by them. The medieval fear that the mirror would capture something of you, that too much attention to your own reflection would cost you something real, has not dissolved. It has found new objects. And then there is the superstition that almost everyone knows and almost nobody can explain. Breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck. The 7 years is Roman in origin. The Romans believed that the body renewed itself completely every 7 years, and therefore any damage to the body's reflection would require 7 years to be undone. But the belief that breaking a mirror causes bad luck draws on something much older and much more widespread than Roman numerology. The idea that the reflection is connected to the person reflected, that damaging the image damages the original. This is sympathetic magic, the principle that like affects like, that an image of a thing has power over the thing itself. It is the same principle that underlies the use of effigies, of dolls, of portraits in various magical traditions. The mirror, because it produced a real-time moving image of the person standing before it, was a particularly powerful site of this connection. Shattering the mirror shattered the image, and shattering the image meant shattering something of the person. What is remarkable about the broken mirror superstition is its survival. We are not a culture that believes in sympathetic magic, or in demonic mirrors, or in souls that can be captured in reflective surfaces. And yet the broken mirror brings bad luck, and we know it, and a small but persistent part of the brain registers it when a mirror breaks, and that part is not the rational part. This is how medieval fears survive, not as conscious belief, not as doctrine, not as anything we would defend if pressed, but as a residue in the cultural memory, a twitch in the nervous system when the mirror shatters, an unease in the moment when the familiar face in the glass becomes, just for a second, strange. The medieval person who feared mirrors was not foolish. They were working with the tools available to them: theology, philosophy, optical theory as they understood it, the accumulated folk wisdom of a culture that had been thinking about reflection for centuries. And they arrived at conclusions that were internally coherent even where they were factually wrong. They were wrong about the optics, they were wrong about the demons, they were wrong about the soul being visible in the reflection, wrong about the demonic reversal, wrong about catoptromancy and the possibility of communicating with supernatural beings through polished bronze. But they were not wrong about the mirror's strangeness. Not entirely. They were not wrong that there is something uncanny in the experience of looking at your own face in a reflective surface. Something that the brain processes differently from how it processes looking at any other face, that produces a particular quality of self-consciousness, of self-estrangement, of awareness of being seen and being the one seeing simultaneously. The medieval fear was too large for the object, too metaphysically loaded, too saturated with theological anxiety. But it grew from something real. It grew from the genuine strangeness of the reflection, from the deep human unease about the relationship between image and reality, from the ancient question of what it means to look at yourself and wonder what is looking back. We have better answers to that question now. Neuroscience has mapped the brain regions involved in self-recognition. Physics has explained the optics. The demons have been retired from serious intellectual consideration. But the question itself has not gone away. And on the nights when the light is wrong and you look in the mirror a beat too long and the face looking back becomes briefly, vertiginously strange, in that moment you are not so far from the medieval person standing before their dim bronze mirror in the candlelight. The reflection is not quite you. It never entirely was. That feeling is very old. The word mirror comes from the Latin mirare, to look at, to wonder at. The wonder came first. The fear followed immediately after. If you watched this far, let me know where you're watching from. Consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. See you next time.